Hi, folks. Whoop, not used to, I don't usually use a mic. We're going to get going, although we do expect some more folks to come in. We knew the Harris Center crowd would be a loud networking bunch, so that's great. Welcome. I'm Rob Greenwood, Executive Director of the Harris Center and also of Public Engagement, but I'm wearing my Harris Center hat here today, exclusively, if that's possible. We were overwhelmed and delighted by the number of folks who signed up for this session. I think we have over 80, and that includes online. And so sorry for the seating layout. It'll be great when we get up to the Battery, when we'll have lots of space, because getting space on this campus is just crazy. Lots of chairs up front. Feel free to come on up, and I won't pick on you. Well, no promises, but I think it would be useful. We have too many folks to do a round table of introductions or around the room introductions, but it would be good for folks from the Harris Center to say who they are. And this guy with the camera I'll start with.
My name is Boyd Fist. I'm Manager of Knowledge Mobilization.
And I see maybe Mike next.
Mike Clare, Associate Director of Public Policy.
And then Kim. And Kathy. And Taylor. Oof, what a title. And because we have the webcast, we will get the mic to people when we get into the Q&A discussion.
And I'll take the opportunity to introduce myself, John Duff, Projects Office Coordinator. Keeping Rob online up here. And yeah, so we will pass this microphone around so anyone that is online can hear any questions from in the room.
Sorry, John, thank you. I was going to say, did I miss anybody? And there are numerous folks here. We've got various folks who are affiliated with numerous Harris Center projects and associates. So as the session goes on, it basically got it broken into two parts. We've spent a fair bit of time over the last year and a half or so developing a new 5-year plan. So you all have a copy of the detailed plan as well as a little synopsis. My PowerPoint, you hopefully will be pleased, will be brief, but I'll speak to many of the points. But more importantly, for the first hour, have an opportunity for conversation, discussion, questions, and I'll draw other Harris Center and or other stakeholders into discussion on the 5-year plan. The second hour, we hope to get into, okay, so that's the framework, and this year we had our transitional first strategic action plan under the 5-year plan. Coming out of the gates April 1 in the new year, we'll have our new strategic action plan. And so what we want to hear from you folks are, what are the key initiatives, topics, projects that you think should be part of our action plan for next year, consistent with the strategic plan. And we also have a sheet, a template on all the chairs, and we have pens if you don't have a pen to fill in if you want before you leave. In case you don't get a chance to chat or you don't want to, you can write it down, and that will all be grist for the mill for us in determining our priorities going forward. Kathy, anything else I should say starting out? Okay, put up your hand if you need a pen, and Kathy will get one to you. Hopefully that's the session you thought you were coming to. We have a great mix of people from within the university and from the outside, so again, thanks a million. And we'll keep this very interactive. Feel free to put up your hand or just yell out as I'm speaking, but I will also pause for air at various times, and folks can raise any questions, comments, suggestions as we go along. Anybody know where that picture is, if you weren't there? When we had our last regional workshop down in Bay d'Espoir, and it's just outside of Harbor Breton. So some say you can see St. Pierre and Miquelon. Was that actually true? I don't know. But it was a beautiful day that day. So our mandate, if you don't know, the Harris Center's going on 14 years now. Started March 2004. think that's 14 years. We were launched as the Harris, we were launched March 2004 as the Center of Regional Development Studies, CORDS, and there was a pre-existing Public Policy Research Center. Dave Vardy was the acting director of PPRC at the time. And I arrived to start up start up CORDS. And Dave had the office next to me and said, "Oh, you're here now. I didn't think they should start a new center till they made one work, but I'll have to work with you." That was my greeting. But we became fast friends, and he's been an amazing mentor, and he's still an associate of the Harris Center. But early on, we agreed it made sense to merge the two because most of the public policy work PPRC was doing related to regional policy and development broadly defined, certainly all related to Newfoundland and Labrador. So we launched the Harris Center in October 2004. So we took the mandate that was approved by the Board of Regents for CORDS and then merged it with the public policy mandate. And we are not, as we've had lots of debate, discussion over the years, we're not a think tank. The university is our think tank. Our job is to facilitate and coordinate all the faculties and units and campuses and centers, teaching and learning, research, outreach, public engagement, as it relates to regional policy and development in Newfoundland and Labrador. So we've done lots of partnerships and projects with people across Canada and around the world, but only if it connects to the needs of our province. We also advise on building the university's capacity relating to regional policy and development. So lots of meetings, never ending, with deans and directors and VPs and the president. And we also work to identify priority themes and projects relating to teaching and learning, research. Public engagement was inserted as a term since the framework, and outreach. Anybody have any questions, comments on the mandate? Because we try to stick to our knitting. The turnout we get at sessions like this is really humbling, but it also means there's a real perceived need in the community for this kind of role and within the university for this kind of role. And we don't try to do other people's jobs. There's lots of other centers and units within faculties and some that span faculties and campuses. And if someone else is able to do it, our job is to be a navigator, helping connect stakeholders or people inside the university who don't necessarily know all the pieces around. Okay. We also have had, over the 13 to 14 years, a broadening of the mandate, and this 5-year plan discussion has been a little bit of a course correction back into the core mandate, because when you focus on Newfoundland and Labrador, regional development, public policy relating to regional development, you have to have a holistic approach, you have to have an integrated approach. Economic development has to connect with social development, has to connect with our culture, has to be consistent with a sustainable approach to the environment. But there are other units, in many instances, that focus particularly on health, particularly on environment, particularly on culture. In each of those cases, not necessarily linking explicitly to economic development. So our launch point is the economic development, regional development, broadly defined, but that creating wealth for Newfoundland and Labrador, prosperity. Loads of shades of gray, never ending. And in the process, I think, we've become really good at how you integrate social, economic, cultural, environmental. And so the facilitation, the project management, the communications, the knowledge mobilization, they can relate to any subject matter. And so we often partner with other units within MUN and stakeholders outside of MUN to lend that expertise. But a theme that will be reoccurring probably throughout this session, and it's reoccurring throughout all our lives these days, budgets are getting tighter. And that is really happening within MUN. And the Harris Center hasn't been immune from that. And so we are trying to maintain our programming with reduced resources. We're still able to tap external funds from federal government, provincial government to a degree, foundations, private sector, NGO where it exists. but they have increasing demands as especially provincial government resources are tighter. So we've had over the last decade increasing demands from people to do more in the social sector, in the health side. We've partnered often with Stephen Bornstein and the group Newfoundland and Labrador Center of Applied Health Research. And we're happy to partner, and we live with our project management mantra of lead, partner, support. And as I often quote, if you've been to many of my sessions, you've heard all the lines, so sorry. Mike Clare always says, we're the Ed Sullivan Show. Sorry about the generational problem there. I don't know what the current equivalent is. Ed Sullivan, we have no talent. We provide the stage. And so the talent for us is memorial faculty, staff, and students. Now, we think we have a little bit. But our main talent is providing the stage, the platforms, the facilitation, the outreach, the inreach. And as people out of needs perceived in the community, in the province, that there's big issues around teacher stress. There's big issues around literacy. And most of them impact economic development, but to varying shades of gray. Well, the less, depending on if you start with dark or light, the farther it is from the economic development prosperity creation, the less direct role we can play, because we don't have the resources. And that does mean there's some gaps. And so wearing my public engagement hat at Memorial, I'm keen to work with stakeholders on how do we fill those gaps. But it's important for the Harris Center to stick to its knitting. Lots of cliches. If you try to boil the ocean, you're not going to get anything done. Happy to have discussion on that as we go along. Any quick comments, thoughts on the mandate? Okay. So the vision, which has evolved a little bit since we first did it over a decade ago, but not much. We're kind of fond of it. And it's a vision for the province, not a vision for the Harris Center. We can have a mission for the Harris Center. So and this is written on the wall as you enter the Harris Center over in Spencer. The Harris Center's vision for Newfoundland and Labrador is of a vibrant democracy, that's a strong public policy piece there, with informed citizens, actively engaged. We had that there before public engagement became a buzzword for us, in realizing a prosperous and sustainable society, which values individual and collective responsibility for decision-making and development, true to our shared sense of place. We tweaked the last line, or last few words, with this 5-year plan. It used to say, true to our unique identity, I think it was. And I think it makes sense. It sounded more, if you're from Newfoundland and Labrador, you know what our identity is, and we're unique. And as we look at the demographics, and we can talk more about that, Dr. Alvin Sims is here, and Dr. Keith Story. So lots of expertise in the room, plus stakeholders here. Immigration, migration are critical issues for this province. And so, and I love to talk about Capelin running at Middle Cove. You go down there, I think it's one of the most iconic Newfoundland and Labrador things. And yet it's full of people from all over the world. And they're just as excited as everybody who was born in Newfoundland and Labrador. So, you know, our identity and our values and our love of this place is linked to the place. And we should be welcoming, and I think I'm preaching to the converted. But anyways, that's why we tweaked that last line. Any thoughts, questions on the vision? And as I say, we've been through a 1.5 years or so of consultation on the plan, so we won't be changing the vision unless someone has something really dramatic to say. And then the mission, why we exist as an organization, is to encourage informed regional policy and development. And for a while, we were tweaking the words, and we were saying public policy and regional development, because we did embrace the broadening of the mandate for 5, 6, 7, 8 years. But when budgets started getting tighter, we really had to hone back in on the prosperity creation focus. So encourage informed regional policy and development in Newfoundland and Labrador by supporting communication and collaboration between Memorial University and the people of this province. So the Harris Center is inherently a public engagement organization. We exist for people in MUN to work with people outside of MUN. Good on mission. Harris Center crowd also, feel free to jump in if you think I missed something. Values. I think we tweaked a couple, but we did a bit of a significant change 5 years ago when we updated the plan, or 6 years ago now. And we work within the values of Memorial's strategic plan, which are available on the MUN website, all of which are consistent with what we do. But with the Harris Center particular mandate, we really highlighted these as key for the Harris Center. And it goes right back to the beginning when we merged PPRC and CORDS to create the Harris Center. Dr. Leslie Harris was still alive. I had done history at MUN, and he was one of my heroes. And I asked the president at the time, Axel Meisen, if we could approach Dr. Harris, if we could name the new merged center in his honor. And that conferred, once he agreed, an immediate brand for the Harris Center. And in particular, integrity, independence, and practical application. Leslie Harris, anybody who had the pleasure of meeting him, he had this amazing combination of humility and gravitas. Scared the hell out of you, or it scared the hell out of me anyway, whenever I was talking to him. And yet he was a really humble, self-effacing person. But he really was trusted by this province. And he chaired the Police Complaints Commission. When business and labor were at an impasse, even though he wasn't a trained mediator, he was trusted by both sides. The fishery was first in crisis. He was asked to do a report and said, close it down. And he wasn't listened to immediately. And so that conferred an immediate brand on the Harris Center. And it really helped us also in dealing with faculty, because faculty are really protective, as they should be, of their voice, of their independence, of their ability to speak truth to power. And we're an administrative unit. I don't have the independence of a faculty member, but they're the horsepower, along with students and staff, that we're helping connect to the needs of the province. And so we're always happy to take money from partners for projects that involve faculty, staff, students, contributing to issues that inform regional policy and development in Newfoundland and Labrador. But if we take your funding, you don't get to change the final report. We love to have the knowledge mobilization, the data dump, the ground truthing sessions. We do a lot of that, so that if you see any errors, or if you'd like to have your 2 cents worth on the interpretation, bring it on. But it's the scholar's name that stands on the... So whether you can say this or not, I say it. What we're selling is independence. And there's a market for it. And there are times some government agencies, some government people don't want that. Then we're not the place to come. But we've had a steady stream over up to 14 years now of people in government, industry, community, coming to us and saying, yes, that's the facilitation, the moderation, the research, the evidence we need to do a good job. So I really beat those values to death. We added inclusivity 6 years ago, because we started, and I had a pretty wide network, and then Mike started, and he had a pretty wide network, but we started to get these younger staff who had networks that were outside ours. And we realized, and we never said no to anybody, but your proactive efforts are always to the people you know and trust. And so we were much more deliberately trying to reach out to networks that we didn't have. And we want to continue. It's never ending. Transparency, collaboration, we can't do. We're not here to be the doers of projects. Another of my favorite lines, I'd rather touch 100 projects than own 2. So our job is to nudge, facilitate, connect. I do everything but deliver. Sometimes I deliver. But that really is the mandate. There's 1,000 faculty. Grad students are increasing all the time. There's 3,800 grad students. Plus, as we do more service learning, I think undergrad students can be connecting with community way more than they do now. And they want to. And we're there as a broker, facilitator, catalyst, funder sometimes. But it always comes down with the Harris Center, the practical application. So we'll maybe get into some of our research funds as we go along. And we've funded a lot of research projects by faculty and students. And we hope faculty take them and publish. They own the IP, they can publish, get peer review publications, that's fantastic. That's not our job. Our job is to fund research that will have a practical application to regional policy and development in Newfoundland and Labrador. Business for labor, for NGOs, for communities. And they're not either or. In fact, engaged scholars, and there are several in the room, know that you can get top-notch peer review publications by doing engaged scholarship. It often takes more time, more logistics, more collaboration, but you can have more impact and get your publications. And our deans are increasingly understanding and supporting that. And our promotion and tenure committees are gradually, it varies by faculty. So that's the values. Any comments, questions on any of those? All right, so we'll get into the meat. So you all have this legal size sheet, and you have a little snazzy, we don't have a Harris Center brochure these days, budgets are tight, so this is as close as something I'll have for a while for leaving at meetings. But there's a lot of meat in the 5-year plan template you have here. And in my parlance, a 5-year plan would have vision, mission, values, goals, objectives, and then the actions are annual things. And you have the 2017-18 actions under each of the goals, under each of the objectives. The objectives may vary from year to year, but for the most part, they shouldn't. Many actions will continue year to year, but they could change dramatically year to year. And so the second half of this meeting is about next year's actions. The first half, which we're halfway through, is about the 5-year plan, the framework, goals, because we will put suggestions, because we get lots of them. You should do a session on X. Dave already emails me 3 times a week with things I should do. They're all good ideas, but you can't do them all with the resources we have. And some of them don't fit the mandate or the priorities in the plan. And so, yes. Yep. Did you have a mic there? Sorry, just a second.
Oh, yes.
There you go.
Yes. So,
And maybe introduce yourself as we.
I'm Erica. I'm in the chemistry department. And I have a question about Labrador.
Mm.
There's a lot of, I'm not from Labrador. In fact, I've never set foot in Labrador. But I see a lot of usage of the term or the phrase Newfoundland and Labrador when it's really something about Labrador. Or about Newfoundland.
Oh.
It's really about the island, you know? And so I wonder how much of a presence Labrador has on the staffing level. Like for example, I think the reason I jotted this down was when you brought up the idea of the Capeland, and you said, you know, this is sort of a classic Newfoundland and Labrador scene. I don't know if it's actually that much of a, I don't know if that would really call to someone as much in Labrador. So how much awareness do we really have on the ground in the day-to-day of making sure that what we're doing actually is relevant to Labrador, which is a very different place?
Great question. My understanding, I've been to Labrador many times over 30 years, and our mandate is pan-provincial, pan-campus, pan-center. So we, over the last 12 years, 13 years, have had a regional workshop in Labrador every year, plus one in Western Newfoundland, one Central, one Eastern. We have Tim McNeil from Nunatsiavut, Deputy Minister of Economic Development and Education with Nunatsiavut on our advisory board. We've always had 1 or 2 folks from Labrador on our advisory board. And our funding projects are often research that relates to water, waste with the MMSB, the RBC, or the Applied Research Fund, which can be any topic under the sun. One of our key initiatives that we'll talk more about right now is the Sustainable Northern Coastal Communities Initiative, which is an iterative engagement process for research. And a concern I have these days, actually, believe it or not, is too much Labrador. Now, my colleagues in Labrador would never agree with that. But that one is building on the Coasts Initiative within Memorial, Cold Oceans and Arctic Science, Technology, and Society. And so we're up and running on the top of the Northern Peninsula. The initial funding came from the International Grenfell Association, so it's for their area. And then Southern Labrador is the next area, and in each of those cases, as I'll speak more about, so the more I say now, the less I can say later. On the Northern Peninsula, we're partnering with our Grenfell campus. So again, consistent with, if someone else can do it, we don't need to do it. So they're the lead on the ground on the Northern Peninsula, and the Labrador Institute is the lead on the ground for Southern Labrador, and we're hopeful of getting additional funding for Nutsivut. So I think, in fact, my Capelin analogy may not be the first to come to mind of most Labradorians, but I'm pretty sure the Straits and maybe in around Red Bay, Capelin roll just like around the Northeast coast. And I think there are probably 4 or 5 Labradors. And so what a compelling analogy would be that would relate to all of them, good question. But yeah, well, Sheila Downer is partly on the Harris Center payroll now, partly on the Labrador Institute, and partly under coasts. Poor Sheila. And she lives in the Labrador Straits, and she's our point person working with the Labrador Institute, but also on the Sustainable Northern Coastal Community Initiative. So I don't think, and I do a lot of presentations, I don't think you'll ever hear me say, or have ever heard me refer to the province as the island. And I do a lot in Boyan on island studies, which we care about. But Labrador is different, but it's a key part of all the work we do all the time. Okay. So you have the long sheet, and I'm not going to say everything on it because you've got it. So if there's something you're particularly interested in, yell out, and we'll get a mic to you. And we'll stick, hopefully, but we can interweave as we go, to the goals and objectives for the next 25 minutes, the framework for the plan, and then we'll dive into, so what do you think should be our priorities for the next fiscal year? So goal 1, our plan when we started, and it stayed that way for the first 2 iterations, or no, 1 iteration of a 5-year plan, but we had an earlier version year to year. It was kind of broken down along the way. Faculty see their mandate: teaching, research, service. We call it outreach for our purposes. And then always a goal, the last one, about your own internal operations. We shook that up a fair bit with this plan. So the structure of the plan is a lot different than it was in the last 5-year plan. And the first goal is really consistent with a lot of the work we used to do, and we want to keep doing, which is being a platform, the Ed Sullivan line, to provide platforms and supports for faculty, students, and staff. And there's a whole bunch of things listed under that in the objectives, and then you can see the current priorities this year, the actions that relate to that. And I think I'll run through all the goals fairly quickly, and then we can come back to any of them that you want. And we want to keep doing that. As I say, the 1,000 faculty, the 3,800 grad students, all the undergrad students who I think we've only scratched the surface with, and the staff at Memorial, many of whom are committed and want to engage on all this. One of the challenges with the way we've worked in the past, and it came to a finer, anyone who knows me knows I'm congenitally honest and I don't hold much back, so poor Kathy gets nervous whenever I talk. With tough budgets, and Mark Abrams, the former, well, his home position is Dean of Science, he's acting Associate VP Research. He talked about when budget cuts are on, so I'll refer to this throughout the meeting. There's a Larson cartoon, he's a big fan of Larson apparently, and it's the hunter looking through the scope of the rifle with the crosshairs pointed at a deer, and the deer is pointing to the deer next to him through the crosshairs. When there's budget cuts, and I've been in government a lot of years in Newfoundland and Labrador and in Saskatchewan through several rounds of budget cuts, story of the last 2 decades, except for the last decade here where I was over here instead. And over the last 3-4 years within MUN, as in provincial government, healthcare, social sector, we're all dealing with it now, ever since oil prices dropped. We have done a ton of good work, and there's loads listed, and we think we're pretty good at communicating. We leverage more money than we get from MUN. We bring in more money than we get from MUN, year after year after year. Most of it is flow through to faculty, to students. That's our job. That's why we exist. And yet, it does take money to provide the function to do that. And so, deans and VPs have their envelopes, the Larson cartoon. Everyone's responsible. Everyone's trying to achieve the mandate of the university. But if they can't see the Harris Center in their day-to-day lives, it's hard for them to say, hey, wait now, you better protect their budget because they're actually helping us achieve our mandate. And so we've inserted goal 3 to be much more attentive. So we don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater, and we're going to keep trying to find research funds and provide platforms to work with faculty, students, and staff. But we've inserted goal 3 so that we are in the face every week of the VPs and the deans. Department heads are really at the rock face of dealing with faculty, dealing with the dean. And we haven't done a good enough job, I think, over the 14 years. There's only so much time of working with department heads. And that's mainly in the departmentalized faculties, obviously. But engineering is now science, arts, Grenfell, Marine Institute. Kathy?
I just wanted to let people know who are watching online, if they wanted to look at the handout that everyone in the room has, it's now posted on our website in the news section. So there's a link there to the full document online.
Thank you. Yes, because we didn't want to inundate you with PowerPoint slides, so you can refer to that sheet. Goal 2 is another one that we've inserted this time around because we were doing it constantly, but it wasn't actually built into our plan. Boyan has spent a big chunk of his time being the lead for MUN in the Knowledge Impact Network that's across Canada at a bunch of universities that share expertise on knowledge mobilization, that actually network with each other to mobilize projects. If we don't have expertise, we'll reach out to them to help meet a need in the community. We're very active members in the Canadian Rural Revitalization Foundation. Mike is a lead nationally with Red A, and the French language zone board, as he sometimes describes it. And we were doing all that from the side of our desk without building it into our work plan. And yet, as we all know, those kinds of networks are fundamental to achieving all our jobs these days. And if you don't build it into your work plan and only do it from side of your desk, you do a half-assed job. And so we want to be quite explicit about the networks nationally and internationally, and the networks within Newfoundland and Labrador. And it also helps our partners see a network that they're part of or know about that we should be aware of that we may not be. So that's transparency. I haven't said it yet, so I'll say it now if you haven't heard this one before. We are the only organization in Newfoundland and Labrador that has a public session on our annual strategic plan. And I defy, well, I've yet to be defied on that point. And we'll do one at Grenfell campus, and we'll do one in Labrador every single year. So transparency is us, because we see our mandate very clearly needing that. And so we wanted to build those networks in so that people were aware of our role in them. And consistent with project management, we're not always the lead for MUN on those networks. Sometimes we're a partner. Sometimes we're just support. The more we support and partner, the better. John, were you going to? Oh, sorry. I gave half the presentation without using all the slides. But I was jumping from goal to goal. So the 4th goal is a brand new one also. And then I'll flip to each. And maybe actually that's where we'll see if people have comments, questions, and I'll go back and forth. Sorry, you're guinea pigs with this PowerPoint. Goal 4. Be a trusted source of information, analysis, and facilitation for regional policy and development. So we're not a think tank. We don't pretend to write research reports from our own staff and communicate them. It's the faculty, staff, and students of Memorial that's the resource. But we are developing capacity within the Harris Center through a few key initiatives. The foremost, I would say, is working with Alvin Sims from the Geography Department. I pulled Alvin into a project about 12 years ago when I was president of the Canadian Rural Revitalization Foundation, SURF, on a national project on rural-urban interaction. And then we got funding from the Labour Market Development Agreement in Newfoundland, partnered with municipalities Newfoundland and Labrador and SURF. And Alvin did an initial mapping of where do you live and where do you work, and started to evolve what became the functional economic regions, which evolved into the population project. And the work that we've done in the population scenarios and the work that Keith is leading now on, okay, those are the scenarios, what are we going to do about it in a constructive, proactive, positive way? So those are some areas that are ongoing Harris Center deliverables that we're not going to broker ad hoc piecemeal. Our advisory board said about 12 years ago, 10 years ago, doing great stuff. Most of the funding programs are call for proposals, see what people come in with. Memorial presents, synergy sessions, jump from topic to topic. Dave Hardy always said to me, Rob, if you keep chasing rabbits, you won't get any elephants. My response was, Dave, I'm spreading contagion because I want 1,000 faculty, the 3,800 grad students, undergrad students to be connecting as much as possible. But there were some big issues in the province that you can't really get at effectively with ad hoc piecemeal reactive. And so we did the flip chart thing, and our advisory board came up with a bunch of potential themes, most of which nested under demographic change, population. And that's how the population project evolved. And it took us about 5 years to come up with money. Thank you, International Grenfell Association, and a couple of private funders. And we're close now, we think, to filling the gap on the rest of the 5-year funding. And when you look at the debate and the traction that project has in this province, out of necessity, we didn't invent it, we helped understand it. That type of proactive, systematic is needed, but you can only do it with money. And so that's the balancing act that we're always trying to achieve with those 5 goals. And so I haven't spoken to all the objectives or actions in the current strategic action plan, but we can segue now. Or does anybody have any thoughts, questions before we segue to the objectives and actions? How's that as a framework for 5 years? Or any critical gaps, any suggestions? Or are you hungry to get to the specifics? Okay, we got a couple of hands up for mics here, folks. Fred there at the back.
Thanks, Rob. And I guess my comment, and maybe a question, I'm not certain, relates to Goal 4, to be a trusted source of information, analysis, and so on. And I was thinking in particular of the population study, which was really needed here. When I read it, I thought it needed another chapter, but that comes from my government background, and I can understand why. I hope the people in the Federation building are really reading that study, and that's where the next chapter needs to be written, because what are the policy implications of that? And I think they're enormous. And I guess that's where I get to my question, because I was looking in your paper here. It says the Harris Center is Memorial University's hub for public policy. And you mentioned in the vision statement, vibrant democracy, sustainable society. And I guess one piece of that I'd like to focus on, and it is a regional issue, is we're getting a great regional shift of population in Newfoundland. Those areas are growing, other areas are shrinking, some of them very, very rapidly. I think we're developing a huge democracy deficit in the province. And I think that's a serious issue, because I think eventually it's going to lead to rural-urban conflict, especially as we try to deal with the fiscal problems. So is there anyone contemplating any work on this so-called democracy deficit, which means in order to address it, you're going to have to increase the number of seats in the House of Assembly in the urban areas and reduce them in the rural areas, unless you want the House of Assembly to grow. And I don't think anyone wants that. But is there anyone looking at this question of the democracy deficit, particularly in the urban regions in the province?
Big question and great one. Thank you, Fred. Keith, are you healthy enough to talk a bit about the population project and some of what's being done there on it? I know he's under the weather, but here's a mic coming for you, Keith.
The mic is for online, so you won't hear it in the room, but
Okay.
unless you use it, people online won't be able to hear you.
Thanks, Fred. Good question. The population project, the primary objective of that exercise is to make policy recommendations to government, and that's the end goal. And the reports that you've read so far are essentially baseline documents, which give us a starting point. And we've been working in Labrador up to this point, and once we get the other funding in place, we'll continue with the island. And so the issues that we've been looking at in Labrador, while they don't necessarily look at the democracy deficit that you described, they are issues which people in Labrador have identified as being critical. So healthcare for seniors, the whole issues about governance and government in Labrador, organization in that part of the province, for municipal services, the whole questions of things like the attraction and retention of professionals in Labrador. We're very familiar with the churn of personnel that go through there, which has some significant development implications, and the future of small business in Labrador. So there are a variety of issues that we've been looking at, which have come from people in Labrador. The point that you have raised, I think, is an excellent one, and I would be only too happy to consider that for the next phase. And that's a pan-provincial rather than island-specific type of project. But I think that's one certainly worth looking at.
And further, thanks, Keith. And certainly Keith is well able, if there's further questions on the population project and so on. On the democratic deficit point, the project Alex Merdland and Lisa Moore on the Democracy Cookbook came out of a Harris Center Memorial Presents. And then they used some public engagement quick start funding to get it off the ground. Alex just told me, I had forgotten that. And so when you look through that raft of short articles that the Telegram has been printing many of, I've discovered people in MUN who I didn't know existed. And that's why we have YAFL also, and why we want more people to put themselves in YAFL. So I think there's a load of people very concerned with the various aspects of Newfoundland and Labrador democracy. My own personal focus in all this over the years has been on regional government and local government. And I was one of several MUN people on the Provincial Government Academic Advisory Committee on the Regional Government Initiative. And I really hope that initiative keeps advancing, because I think you are right on the population dynamics, on the cost of providing services, on our fiscal situation. But I don't think we should only look at it as provincial government's problem. In fact, I think, and not that you were saying that, but the number of MHAs. If we can have regional government, like most of the Western world does, you can actually pull neighboring communities consistent or informed by the functional economic regions Alvin has been mapping. Because with the fishery, with forestry, with mining, with tourism, with small-scale manufacturing, there's going to be a need for people to be living in rural Newfoundland and Labrador forever. But we got to be way more productive, way more innovative, way more efficient, blah, blah, blah. And so I think there's a bunch of streams that we're involved in that inform that, but it's messy. There was another hand up, I think, Kathy? Yep.
Thank you, Erica from Chemistry again. I just wanted to comment on how important things like Goal 5 are, even though they don't seem that exciting. So I'm glad to see that's there. It's the kind of thing that maybe people roll their eyes at or say, oh, that's just administrative bloat or whatever, but it's kind of the opposite of that. and particularly in the university that I think has a bit of a problem that way. It's good that the Harris Center is modeling a different way of focusing on governance and appropriately structured organization.
Thank you. Because we are lean and there's not many core funded staff. You know, there are a few people who introduce themselves there. Most of them are dependent on project money, and so it's or cobbled together through different sources, half Yaffle, half Harris Center, blah, blah. Other thoughts, questions on the framework? And or we can segue into priorities for next year. Yep.
Hi, my name is Jerry Rogers, and I'm work for the good people of St. John Centre. So I'm one of those people up on the hill in Confederation Building. So I'm curious about really the communication with, for instance, the Population Project and government in terms of really being able to use that expertise in policy development and decision making. Like, really, how is that working? Can it work better? Is there an openness? Is there an appetite from government? What's the state of the nation there?
It can absolutely work better. I would say, though, it's better now than it was 5 years ago or 6 years ago or 7 years ago. And there's tons of us. It's a small place, right? Mike and I are old. Various of our staff are not as old, but still have their own networks and experience. So we have loads of colleagues and allies and partners in provincial government, as well as federal government. But I think we have been through a period where there wasn't, we would have sessions like this and no one would show up from the provincial government. We would have synergy sessions and memorial. Synergy sessions originated explicitly to give a safe space for provincial public servants and federal, but there's more provincial, lots more locally, and not on the record. Feel free, lower your guard. You're not representing your department. And we had a lot of that in the first 3, 4, 5, 6 years of the Harris Center. And then it just went away. And I think we did go through a period where people were afraid to stick their head up. And I do think the new government, you know, it's got a fiscal mess, but there is a willingness. There are some new deputies, and there's a few established deputies. If I email today, I get a response the same day. If I emailed 6 or 7 years ago, they'd ignore me as long as they could, except for the few close colleagues that I knew real well. So I think we're scratching the surface still. Mike has done some work on how the Quebec government supports the University of Quebec system and actually funds the universities in the Quebec system to have money to respond to demands from government departments. So because it does cost money to pull people together, and it doesn't take a lot. That's what we've really discovered with the public engagement quick start, up to $1,000. And we can't keep up with the demand. But partly it's just that we had and I'll shut up in a second and see if Mike wants to add something to maybe get the mic to him, Kathy. Policy NL, Robert Thompson, when he was clerk, launched. And I think it was a really good initiative, and it still kind of exists. I still see some emails. I know budget cuts are affecting it. But we lobbied, self-centered, interested, as always. Let us be the secretariat. Because to Robert's credit, he wanted federal government and municipalities and College of North Atlantic and university and NGOs. But if it's built into government, budgets go up and down, champions come and go. And indeed, that has been the experience. So I don't think we've had a tradition in this province of building capacity. I think the poverty reduction strategy did it, maybe still does. But we had our round with the regional economic development boards, and they never got embraced as soon as Wells left. So I think we have a long ways to go. Mike, anything you'd want to add to all that?
You pretty well covered everything, Rob. The only thing I would say is that it is really cheap to get people together. Taylor, when we did the trauma thing last year, we got 185 people in a room for $1,000. I mean, that's how efficient that we operate. We've worked mostly with public servants, but we would like to work with the political level more than we have in the past. And that's our next challenge.
Hi, I'm Riz O'Malley from the Graduate Students Union and also the Racialized Students Representative for the Canadian Federation of Students, Newfoundland and Labrador. I just had a question in terms of, given that inclusivity is one of the Harris Center's values, and that's like amazing, and given your goals of providing platforms and supports for students, faculty, and staff, and kind of shaping public policy based on all that, I was just wondering what work is being done to actively reach out to communities that are disenfranchised and not seen and represented in those spaces anyway. I know like international students, as an international student myself, although we are so crucial to solving, you know, the population problem in this province, we're not really represented in the boardrooms that make decisions. We can't vote. So in terms of shaping public policy, like our voices aren't really at the table. So I was just wondering, in terms of shaping your goals and your objectives, how are you folks having a conversation with the most marginalized in the communities?
And some of my colleagues may want to weigh in on that more. I don't think we've done a great job reaching out to students. Grad students, yes, but more in the research areas. Our Sustainable Northern Coastal Communities Initiative is very explicitly about proactively going to rural, remote communities, especially where there's Aboriginal populations, funding the interaction, being very careful that we try to engage on their priorities. So it's not us saying, we're from the university, we're here to help you. Mike has been our lead on immigration and refugee work. So Mike, do you want to speak to some of that? And Boyan may want to add some as well.
So a couple of things. So we're very aware of the situation. I chair an ad hoc group of representatives from different government departments, different NGOs, etc. We meet every 6 or 8 weeks to talk about immigration policy, to see how we can better integrate newcomers into the province more generally. Another thing that we are doing is we have created what we call a lead semester, leadership, engagement, action, dialogue semester, in which we have taken great attention to make sure that people who do not have a voice do get involved in decisions that affect them. People who are possibly illiterate or whose voices aren't necessarily heard all that often. So it is a big part of our thinking, and we try to integrate it as much as possible.
Boyan?
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I can't vote either. I hear you. We haven't done a great job with undergraduate students. We used to have a fund. So one thing where I think we did do a really good job is our funding is one of the rare funding opportunities that is available to international students as well as to permanent residents and Canadians. So we have funded many graduate international students. We used to have a very small undergraduate fund. That fund hasn't been operational for years just because of the way the budget for that fund got cut. We still have regional development undergraduate award that we award every year, which is also available to international students. But that's specifically for undergraduates. It's not a lot of money. I think the other thing that we did okay with is for our regional workshops, we always secured some funding for graduate students, and they were often international graduate students, to take them to regions of the province, especially in Labrador and in some of the more remote places that they probably wouldn't get to on their own. So really kind of to give them a sense of what this province is like outside of St. John's, right? We are still working on securing the funding again to be able to do that, but we certainly managed to bring some students with us to St. Anthony just last week.
We found that, I think this is a safe generalization, Boyan will tell me if it's not, we've had more interest from students from other countries and from elsewhere in Canada to go to rural and remote Newfoundland and Labrador than from Newfoundlanders and Labradorians. There's a real take up and interest to go work with those communities. So we're kind of segueing here from the framework, which we can keep speaking to, but also into priorities for next year. And again, knowing that we'll be figuring out how it relates to our mandate, obviously. but also the goals and objectives. Any thoughts, suggestions on programs we should be making sure we keep up, or topics we should be covering, or communities we should be reaching, or all of the above? Interesting. Yeah. Maybe the format, because we were going to have roundtables and have breakout, but
I think that the work that you folks do with vital signs in terms of that research and information that's coming out of that project is essential, especially in the work that we're doing with the Canadian Federation of Students, because that data just does not exist anywhere else.
Right.
So the more research and the more funding that you folks can have that goes into getting the numbers that don't exist anywhere else in terms of regional development and how we're going to get folks to stay here, and why are people staying, why are they leaving, like more of that information would be great. Thanks.
well, that is fantastic. And I'm glad someone mentioned, and it'll all come up as we go along, vital signs. Kathy, do you want to speak about the current status of vital signs? Kathy is our lead on vital signs. And it's a partnership with the Community Foundation. Ainsley is here also, who's been a key player lead for us working with the Community Foundation since 4 years now, I think. Kathy, you just want to give an update on where we are and what's next?
Sure. Ainsley and I have had a few meetings since we launched Vital Signs in October to kind of already start planning for next year. And there's lots of areas to cover. We always joke we only have 16 pages, and if only we had more. And I think the same goes for, we only have 16 pages worth of funding. So there's so many different avenues that we can cover. One of the things that we wanted to do this year, and I think I'm okay to speak to it, it's not about the tax thing. It's not what I'm going to say. But we wanted to have a little bit more of an integrated approach in coming up with the themes and focus areas for the report. So we're looking at putting together a steering committee of sorts, or a steering team that will look at having regional representation from different parts of the province, and also on specific topic areas. And that will rotate then from year to year or every 2 years. So there's a bit more of buy-in, and there's a bit more of involvement from different organizations within the province and also different areas. Definitely one of the comments we had this year, and we pretty much get this comment every year because it's really hard to fill that gap effectively, and that's the Labrador information. And there's not a lot of information in the report on Labrador specific. There's not a lot of Labrador specific data because there's not a lot of Labrador specific data that's available, that's reliable, that StatsCan gathers enough numbers for. So it's a bit of a balance for us. But we figure having someone from that region on the team early on can help identify what the priority areas would be to find that data, but also help gather data from different sources. So when we're stuck with having to go to StatsCan, sometimes it's harder to get localized information for the regions. And there's lots of data that isn't StatsCan data that's still reliable and still interesting and topic worthy for discussion, especially in a publication like Vital Signs, which is supposed to be, accessible and clear and timely and relevant and all those things.
And if Vital Signs fulfills the vision we have for it, right now, we're building the brand, although I think the brand is built. I mean, it's really amazing how much traction it got. And it's a national brand, thanks to the Community Foundation. But in Newfoundland and Labrador, the take-up has been amazing. But getting funding for it, it's fascinating that, public policy, regional development stuff, we all know is fundamental to understanding and advancing staying here. And yet it's almost like, I don't know if it's like breathing or something. There are discrete issues that people can get excited about, and you can have funders want to give you money. But getting funding for public policy, I don't know, maybe it's because Canada, we see that as government's job. But if we could get enough funding coming through Vital Signs to cover more than just the production each year, it could create another pot of funding for research. That would be applied research for faculty and students, partnering with external partners on the themes and issues in Vital Signs. So I think it's a lovely brand and vehicle that could really be harnessed to do more of what you're saying we need to do, because we definitely want to do it. I see a hand up here at the front, Kathy. Yep. And Alvin, I'm going to pick on you in a few minutes. Just say a little more about RANLab when you're ready. Yep.
Kathy Donovan. I'm from Community Health and Humanities at the Faculty of Medicine. My roots are in public health practice in the community. And historically, the relationship between the university and the community has been fairly tokenism, really. We need a name on a research proposal. And one of the things that always, as a public health practitioner out there, I often wondered what kind of a true resource we had at the university that went beyond that need to fulfill the requirements of a research application, or even beyond research. There's a whole lot of expertise that we should be able to mobilize from a service perspective. And knowing the whole tenure thing, I know the importance of research versus even teaching or a service to the community. I do know certainly the public engagement money supports that kind of relationship, but I'm not sure the community is sufficiently aware of those opportunities. Is there another way the Harris Center can sort of promote not only the value of that kind of a service component beyond building the research portfolio, both to the faculty and students, as well as to the community?
Great question, and something rattled through my brain recently on a long plane trip, and I haven't shared this with the Harris Center team, so now they'll get scared. I don't think it's that difficult, but I think it's kind of obvious with our Harris Center coordinate, facilitate role, cutting across all campuses, all centers, all faculties. We have websites with lots of good, here's who to call stuff, but I don't think we have a good tool. It could be online, it could be paper, it could be a campaign, it probably should be all of the above, on here's who to connect with at Memorial for. And if it's economic development, if it's business development, if it's innovation, if it's health, if it's facilitation. And I think with our coordination facilitation role, navigator role, that could be a project in 2018-19 that we flesh out some more. I think we have all the pieces. I don't know that we've pulled it together well enough.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jennifer Crowe. I'm with the Office of Student Life as the Student Leadership Development Coordinator here at Memorial. One thing that just occurred to me, and I know you brought it up a couple times, was the undergraduate engagement piece. It just seems to me that there's so much potential for this within the Harris Center, even from just kind of brokering research grants for undergraduate students. The quality of honors research that I know is happening in this university is amazing, and I think it's unfortunate sometimes that those students don't have the opportunity to perhaps engage with community-based research or have the funding to leverage publishing opportunities. So I'm just wondering, and I guess maybe it's a comment, maybe it's a question, are there opportunities that you're thinking about in terms of better engaging undergraduate students, whether it's through community engaged learning or if it's through kind of the research piece?
And some of my colleagues may want to weigh in on that one. And I think the thing we're just discussing, doing a better job marketing what's available, because YAFL is a tool tailor-made to outside organizations saying we want some work done on X. And undergraduate students and graduate students and faculty and external people going on there and discovering possible projects to work on with an external partner who wants to be worked with. When I did my honors thesis 1,000 years ago, Greg Keeley phoned Nancy Rich and said, I got this guy wants to do a labor history paper. Got anything you want done? And she said, we just moved offices. I got all the Civil Service Association and NAPE records from the first 50 years. That any good? And for a young history student, that was gold. And they got their history written. Treasury Board still uses it, I think, as a resource. NAPE still uses it. And I got a golden topic for well, that's service learning. And it's harder to get service learning into classes, courses, but it's happening. I think we can do more of that. The example Mike gave of LEAD, is a wonderful program, but I think just brokered projects. Boyan, anything you'd want to add to that, Kathy?
In the past, we probably focused with undergraduate students. We focused on brokering opportunities for an entire class rather than individual students. So we had projects, for example, we sent an entire biology class to Manaus River to help with the project they needed. Amy Tucker in our office just recently brokered a project with Granville students in Flat Bay to help them with some tourism opportunities there. So I think that work is being done at the moment. We're still kind of trying to figure out what that looks like. We don't, it can be costly because suddenly you have 15 or 20 or 25 people who have to get from A to B, which usually means a bus, and they have to eat something. And, you know, so it gets complicated a bit. I would like to include grad students more, and we're still kind of trying to figure out what that looks like given the kind of work we do.
Mike, want to jump in on this, and then we have a hand up here and maybe elsewhere. Kathy's keeping track of the hands.
To continue the Ed Sullivan analogy, we are impresarios, which means that we have stages and platforms, and we're always looking for talent. And at a university where there's so much distributed learning, if I can put it that way, it's really hard to find talent sometimes, especially particular kind of talent that you're looking for. So the more that you know of people who are doing interesting work, bring it to our attention. We're always looking for, I mean, we look through YAFL and other sources, but there's always nuggets out there that we don't know about. So let us know.
And I know there's a hand up here, Kathy. Wave it around if you want to.
Thank you. I am Sophia. I'm chairperson for the Canadian Federation of Students here in Newfoundland and Labrador. And my question stems from a comment that you made about trying to stay, I guess that to attract all things from like different departments across the university and in all different campuses. So and I've been like hearing throughout the conversation how we can engage undergrad students and graduate students, but from programs like tourism, like business, like economics. Like I'm wondering, what are your plans and your thoughts to engage other departments, like the social science, like fine arts, like hard sciences, that I really haven't heard throughout this conversation. And also because as someone pointed out not too long ago about honors programs, and I know, for example, when I studied at Grenfell and I was doing my honors thesis in psychology, I didn't get any funding to do it, and I had to like pay it out of my pocket. And as an international student who was already paying 3.5 times more, that was very challenging to me. So I was wondering what are your thoughts on that?
Right. So when we started 14 years ago, some thought, nice idea, never work, because faculty are too busy doing their thing and they're not going to pay attention. And others thought, well, it's all going to be political science and economics. And we've had lots of great projects with people in political science, economics, geography, but also hard to hear Hussein is here from engineering. Are you willing, I'm picking on people here, speak a little bit about the work you've done, water related?
Yeah, I'm in engineering at Tahir Hussain, and I think I have been very much benefited through Harris Center funding. We have been doing work for rural communities, especially for safe drinking water. You know, I think we have some issues related to DBPs in the water, and I think Harris Center was very supportive. Although it is a small amount of funding, but it really helped me to a level where now I have international funding to move in that direction.
And that involves students in the research generally.
Many of them, yeah, many of them, yeah. And also a few research engineers, you know, I trained in that direction, not just using Harris Center funding, but this helped me in getting a big fund from outside, which provided me facilities to train 4 research engineers, and they are currently working on that project. You know. Yeah.
And Boyan, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, there is, we didn't mention all the departments we work with. There is a little bit of some departments become more prominent than others because it depends on the need we hear from the community. So, for example, in Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences, we have fantastic working relationship with the Department of Folklore because there's so many opportunities we get to hear about from the communities. So if you know students, or if you have students who have projects they would like to do and are looking for a partner, I would really encourage you to tell them to come and talk to us. We might be able to actually find them somebody. Just because the community didn't identify the need, it doesn't mean that the need is not there, but sometimes we kind of need to push a little bit. So we don't do a lot of that kind of brokering the other way around. Community usually comes to us and we find somebody at Memorial, but there's no reason why we wouldn't do it the other way around as well.
And it's supply and demand. And if you're interested, anybody can put their expertise or interests in YAFL. It's just a tool, but it helps.
Maybe this is something that Tahir can speak to. I've forgotten now who it was, but someone was emailing around from engineering their capstone project or something. They were saying, well, are there any interesting projects for students to do around, like I was looking at maybe having a stepper motor controlled stage for a microscope, perhaps something like that. But that could also really lend itself to the community as well. So I don't know if you've been reaching out through the Harris Center as well for these capstone projects.
Yeah, I think this is another interesting area, because we have capstone projects especially in term 8 of engineering. And I think we have been trying to get few students in that direction. And I think they have been planning to move in doing some real, case studies outside. I think very recently we covered about 6-7 case studies in different communities like Pooch Cove, Torbay, Sunnyside, New West Valley, and also Salvage. These are some of the communities for which we have been addressing these issues, and our students, they go, bring sample, we analyze. I think this Harris Center money is a seed money which helps in promoting other research. That's what we did. We got those facilities when it was really critical for us to get some money. But later on, I think we approached to various municipalities and also to other organizations. And it has been a win-win situation for our students and for us as well. Yeah.
Thanks to hear. And I think there's another hand behind you. Just before you do, there's an action objective in the plan now. Forget which goal it's under. Because we also have gotten good at knowledge mobilization and communications over the years. And so all the good types of projects Tahir is mentioning and others, if you don't get the word out that they're happening, they don't exist. And so we now also, partly under goal 3, we've already done, and we could do more, partnering with different faculties or schools or centers we've often been built into, like Barb Neese, the On the Move project, included the Harris Center as a partner to help with knowledge mobilization of that project. And then some funding is provided in that project. So we can be doing a lot more of that kind of stuff too. Sorry.
Riza from the GSU again. It was more of like a comment really than a question on reaching out to departments based on what the community needs and stuff. So I think one of your folks, like part of your mandate is to like ensure that like Newfoundland and Labrador as a province is sustainable and is prosperous and is a healthy society basically. And I think it's general knowledge that social inequity is definitely a contributor to the lack of health in a community, definitely affects its citizens and the prosperity in a province. So in terms of reaching out to, like I know there's a lot of amazing honors research and just research being done on gender inequity or like race-based data and colonialism and all of that. So just a comment on that, I guess.
No, thank you. Oh, okay.
Thank you. I'm Colleen Quigley from the Memorial Library System, and I have a few questions, comments. So I guess they're comments.
So a new one.
Yeah, I like that. So I just wanted to thank you guys for funds like the Quick Start and Accelerator Fund, because I'm sure those have helped projects get off the ground. So please keep those. I'm sure you can't really make that happen. But in terms of the library's role in the Harris Center's activities, I'm thinking a lot about that whole idea of the talent scout metaphor for, and perhaps there's a role there for the libraries and the librarians and library staff to take more of an active role, because we do see a lot of the faculty members and the students as they're coming to start their projects. So maybe we should have a more, I don't know, formalized, or I don't know, but that's just an idea to put there. And when I'm looking at your mandate, sorry, this is a long one, just settle in.
No, we're good.
Okay, so when I'm looking at your mandate, it looks like there's kind of two portions to your mandate. There's the regional policy and development, and then there's advice on building university capacity and identifying priorities. So I guess my general question, you don't necessarily have to have an answer for me, is that weighted 50-50? Are you looking at the regional policies as equal to? And then when I dig deeper into your goals and objectives, when I look at the objectives, there is an objective for all of those things built into each of these items, which is fantastic. But when I look at the blurbs for each of your goals, so when you actually spell out what goal 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 are, regional policy and development is explicitly expressed from goal 1 to 4. But that second part, that whole identify capacity building and prioritization is not. So I guess what I would my comment, more than a question, would be, is when you're trying to prioritize your objectives, if that second part is really actually important to you, please ensure that those objectives, and I have them starred here, the ones that I think are related to part 2, are actually part, because I can see how part 2 could slide away and part 1 becomes this giant glob of important things, not to say that they're not important. So that is really all I have to comment on.
Great comments. On the last one, I think, first of all, it'd be good if you shared with Kathy your asterisks on the, so that we can, because I do think the wording maybe can be tweaked to clarify. To be accurate, the advising we do on building the university's capacity and the priority themes and projects we identify all should be related to regional policy and development. So the two are in part one and the same, but this is more about capacity building of the university. The upfront would be more the brokering, facilitating. The advisory part, I used to be a member of deans and directors. When I started, I reported the VPA and the VPR. And then when the president created the external relations portfolio, Harris Center, Office of Public Engagement moved under the president. So I have a lot of face time with the president, which is a good thing, but not as regular with the deans. And so that also is why we added that goal 4, to make sure we're really intentional about working with the deans. I think it's goal 4. No, goal 3, sorry. On the library, I love what you're saying. And I think the library could be a perfect fit with goal 3. And one of the opportunities, and this hasn't come up yet, but in the next fiscal year, we will be at the Battery. And that presents some amazing opportunities, although also potential challenges. So we don't want the Battery to become this amazing public engagement whirligig and not connect back with St. John's campus here, Marine Institute, Grenfell campus, Labrador Institute. So we need to, an analogy I've used on the Battery stuff, it's a little bit like an interpretation center, because there's so much access. There's 750,000 cars go up and down. Now, there's a lot go here, but they just don't stop. They don't know where to park. So if we use the Battery right, and it's wired to the hilt, thanks to the federal funding, we can be webcasting community events from Northwest River when Scott Nilsson does his monthly session, and have a room at the Battery and people online anywhere engaged in that session, and vice versa. The library, we're in discussions, because there's Yaffle Corner down under the staircase. So I think, be careful what I say, I think we're going to have kiosks at the Battery where people can go online in the library system, which you can't do over the internet because of licensing. So we're not going to have a downtown library, but we're going to have library resources, partnership capability. And so I think there's a ton more we could be doing with the library. Good. Did I see any other hands there? Or anybody have specific suggestions? Yep. Oh, hang on so the people online can see it. Yep. Kathy's getting her exercise here this afternoon.
A question about objective 1.4 in goal 1. It mentions a strategic doing workshop. What is that?
This is exactly the way this session was meant to work. Does Mike or Justin want to speak to that?
Strategic doing is a new facilitation technique that has been developed by Purdue University. And they came up here and trained about a dozen people or 24 people a couple of months ago. It's a wonderful way of getting representatives of different groups where nobody can tell somebody else what to be doing, how to work collectively. And we hope that the Harris Center can be, quote, licensed to certify people in the technique. Because what we need in this province more than ever today are facilitators who can bring disparate groups of people and desperate groups of people together to solve common problems. And we found that strategic doing is a really good way of doing that. And so that may become a program of the Harris Center in the future.
Yep. Another question back here, Kathy, or a comment?
Yeah, it's long. That sounds fantastic. Would there be a mechanism, for example, for encouraging, say, department heads to participate in this kind of thing? Or no, because I think, especially at the department head level, it's people who don't necessarily have any leadership training, but are now in a leadership role beyond what they've been kind of trained up to do. You know, like I operate a research group, I teach classes, I manage that size of people. But I'm not a department head by design. But if I were to become one, God forbid, then yeah, it would be another level of strategic planning, another level of organizational development that I know nothing about.
Well, that's a beautiful suggestion, because strategic doing, you know, and a lot of us have done facilitation, and there's a load of different approaches, techniques, and they all have different strengths. And strategic doing has its applications, and there's other tools. But the crowd at Purdue have done this now with scores of universities, partly as outreach public engagement tool, partly for helping university management. And we've talked about how do we help the university help itself. Department heads might be the window into that. That's a superb suggestion. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Dan McGettick, and I'm a retired parole officer. And I work with turnings and outreach for people who are in jail and out of jail. So I'm a little bit, probably I'll hesitate to speak because it's not really connected. It may not be. However, the more I listen, the more I think it is, because I know Mike Clare very well, and I was on a committee with him about violence prevention. Our people are high needs, high risk. And a lot of our volunteers now are from the university. Some are criminology students, social work students. And at times we're asked to speak in certain classes. And while this is so important what you're saying, and I think it's really moving forward well, unless the marginalized and those who are not integrated back into the community properly are involved somehow, and unless the citizens are informed, as you say, and that we can give them more information, because there's so many problems. I'm not going to take too much time, but drug issues, mental health issues, some of these things should be in curricula in schools. Bullying, people who are leaving schools and end up in gangs. Okay, every day. Well, I go to HMP a lot, and there's much dysfunction there, notwithstanding the fact the good work is done by certain people there, okay? But many of those people are not integrating successfully, and it's costing a lot of money, and they're not giving back because they can't. And they're ending up in houses and housing that's not fit for anyone. So I guess I'd like to see how this can be connected even more, because of people who can probably express it more well, or who know more, to realize that we went to Labrador and we worked with Aboriginal circles. We're using those circles now with offenders, okay? And there's a Correctional Conditions Release Act in the federal government, you know, from the Charter of Human Rights, that's there to engage Aboriginals and other people in the release of offenders back to communities so that they won't reoffend. That's our business. Not being soft on offenders is challenging them to get back into the life. So somehow this is connected. The more I think about it, and unless it is not more, should be more connected, because it's almost a global issue now with all these things you're talking about. You know, there's so much right-wing stuff, and I don't need to go into all of that. What Harper's done and all this stuff, he said, give me all your offenders. Don't worry. We'll look after it. Yeah, but they're coming back into the community, and they're not coming back in good shape.
No, really big issue and really well put. So don't. And one of the things that as we look at the demographics in this province, we're going to have labor shortages. We need people from all walks of life and with whatever challenges to be integrated into the workforce. And the people, and I'm not the expert in this stuff, but social determinants of health, best way to be healthy is to have a job, amongst with all the other things. And so the Harris Center has to play a role. One of the challenges we've had is that because of our budget being tighter now, we can't take on all the issues to be the lead. So what we want to do is provide support. I think the kind of stuff Mike described on strategic doing is the kind of toolkit that could, and we partnered with Penny Rowe, with the Community Sector Council, when we brought in the people from Purdue. So I think there's a load of ways we can be, the lead semester could take that on as an issue with how many students? 20 students for a full semester with external partners. And students are chomping at the bit to get into those types of issues. So I think we can broker that kind of stuff, but with our particular mandate focused on prosperity creation, it's only where you can see the labor market connection. So it's where we lead, where we partner, where we support, if that makes sense. Yep, back up here and then over here. Oh, Mike's here. Oh. Yep, Kathy.
Hi, Kathy Donovan again. With the focus on sort of the whole economic and sustainability piece, I know there's some specific focus here. I know it's in the objectives, a gas and oil forum. And I know you always want to have a very positive approach. But I think it's time someone overtly takes on resettlement other than CBC. Because we essentially have resettlement by default when we're closing our small community schools, when we're moving health to regional centers, and it's happening by default. And I think it's time somebody needs to take it on, say, let's have a real discussion on it, and then it might become a political a question for the next election. But we're killing our small communities, and as much as we're talking about regional development, we're killing our small communities. And I think we need to have that discussion, and nobody is sort of willing, again, except for CBC, which seems to have just taken it on, to get out there and say, this is the reality, this is the real information, public opinion and engagement, but also needing the expertise. And I'm just wondering if, when you're doing your oil and gas forum, would you put on a forum around resettlement, because it is a big piece in policy.
Yep. So there's a bunch of ways we prioritize tasks to do, and some come from outside wanting to partner, and sometimes we say, sorry, but we'll put it into our plan for next year. We tried to do a conference on resettlement, and we couldn't get funding from anybody to do it. We tried to do a conference on the fishery and community sustainability. Mike and Dave Vardy held meetings for 4 years, and we had the head of the Fishermen's Union, federal fisheries, provincial fisheries. Eventually they wrote a letter to me, 3 of them, federal fisheries, provincial fisheries, and the union, saying, thank you for trying to organize a conference on the fishery. We are now going to attend the Premier's forum on the fishery. We will not come to any more meetings you organize. So you can't dance if no one shows up to the dance. So we are an administrative unit of the university. We're not advocates. So on resettlement, I was interviewed a bunch of times, and we are part of the Sustainable Northern Coastal Communities Initiative. Is exactly about, and of course the demographic work Alvin has done. I saw Alvin step out, so I'll ask him to speak to this in a sec, Kathy, if you want to get the mic to Alvin. Maybe after Ainsley. We would love to do more work in that area for an informed, balanced, respectful discussion. And I love the headline CBC had on their website. Anyways, let's not talk resettlement, let's talk reinvention. Craig Pollitt from M&L had a superb little blurb on CBC about that. Because we have to do things in new ways. But I would also, this is an area I actually pretend to know a bit about. The fishery isn't going to go away. Forestry isn't going to go away. Mining isn't going to go away. We need humans to live in some type of communities, and we want them to. But it's going to need to be more regional, unless it's very remote, blah, 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 blah. So I'm with you, but thank you. We'll put it back on the list for priorities. Well, I tell you. Now, Boyan may want to weigh into that too, but maybe we'll go to Ainsley and then let Alvin and Boyan if they want.
Hi, I'm Ainsley Hawthorne of the Community Foundation of Newfoundland and Labrador. And I think a lot of the language in the strategic goals focuses on connecting community needs with university expertise. But something I think the Harris Center is already doing that maybe isn't quite captured in the strategic goals is also identifying expertise amongst community members that aren't university affiliates. So this is something that we do and consider extensively in vital signs so that we have representation of not only academic expertise, but also the expertise that we know exists amongst community members outside the university. And YAFL is doing this as well because it gives that opportunity for anyone to input their expertise. So my first question is whether this is something that the Harris Center is thinking about expanding or strategizing more specifically around, whether it can be a hub for mobilizing community knowledge in addition to university knowledge. And then my second question, which is really more specific, corollary to the first question is, I'm an independent academic, so I work in the community, but I have a PhD. And I am doing academic research, but as an independent academic, you struggle to access university resources in the form of library resources for doing your research. So certain universities in Canada are trying to facilitate research for independent academics. I think SFU is one that has come up with some sort of independent academic affiliation. And I'm wondering if there's a role that the Harris Center can provide there as well, because there will be more and more independent academics in Canada and in the province. And it seems to me to be to everyone's benefit to continue to facilitate research from those types of individuals.
Points. And on the last one, it's interesting. I think in both areas you highlighted more than we probably recognized ourselves that we do that. And even on the population project, there's a couple of areas where we've had community participants, well, the stakeholders identify this is a priority issue moving forward. Succession planning was one, and housing in Labrador was another, in rural, remote, with declining population. And Keith is sick from working so hard, trying to find someone in the university to work on those topics. And we actually went with people from outside after not being able to get someone inside. So there was loads, and public engagement is all about the expertise outside the university and the expertise inside, and how we're better off, all of us, by combining them. So the Harris Center very much is into that. YAFL, the new version of YAFL, you don't have to be from MUN, put your expertise or your projects in. So that's an explicit tool for that. Another hat I'm wearing these days with the public engagement side is developing an alumni strategy. And MUN has 95,000 alumni, most of whom live in Newfoundland and Labrador, most of whom want to contribute to student groups, faculty projects, community projects, and we haven't been tapping them enough. So that strategy is going to look at that more. And when we talk alumni, well, if you do it for alumni, you don't limit it to alumni. I think there's a whole lot more we can do on that. So yeah, I think that maybe speaks to what you raised. Boyne, did you want to speak to the resettlement issue?
No, it's better if I don't, actually.
And Alvin, I know Alvin has done a ton of work. Alvin, did you want to speak to the resettlement work that you guys have done that hasn't been released? I don't think, but Rand Lab, Regional Analytics Lab, is an amazing resource for this province. And Alvin and Jamie Ward have pulled it together. Do you want to speak on the resettlement point or anything else you want to?
Well, we'll talk about RANLab to start with. We're actually a sort of virtual group that's been hiding away for about 7 years, developing tools and analytics and whatever that can be used specifically for places like Newfoundland and Labrador, where you got sparse populations and all these other things. Actually, on resettlement, we've actually developed a database that where we have all the places in Newfoundland that were resettled.
And Labrador?
Newfoundland and Labrador. Okay, generationally speaking.
Yeah.
Newfoundland and Labrador. We have all the places that were resettled and the places to which people resettled to by numbers, by families, and whatever that we did. And we developed something called the Coastal Highway, which had not been published yet. And we were going to do it in that conference that Mike and Dave on
We
resettlement.
tried to do it.
And an interesting thing that happened there when we started looking at the data, comparing it to modern data, places in decline, and so on, there are a lot of places that were considered to be growth centers. There are actually ones now that are like Galtas that had a fish plant. People moved in there and so on. Now you're down to 100 people from 600 people. And we found that a lot of these places that are now under stress were formerly growth centers in the last resettlement thing, sort of thing. And we're actually suffering the consequence of bad planning. Percival Copes, God bless them and all that other stuff or whatever. And I've been studying this since the 70s. I mean, my first paper I ever published is on the impact of resettlement in Newfoundland and Labrador on settlement and concentration of activities and stuff like that. The other thing that we've been doing in the ARIS Center is now we have developed these sort of big data models that takes local information. It can be quantitative and qualitative. And we look at how places are connected. And it can be economic connections. And if there's social information, we got social connectivity that goes on there. We have recently initiated a project between MNL and
Municipalities, Newfoundland
and Labrador and ACOA and RANLab. And we had a pilot project we're just finishing up that we started last year, where we actually go out and collect micro data on small communities. And it's my sort of small town, big data initiative, I call it, or whatever. We take all this information and we marry it together with administrative data from Stats Canada and any other sources we can get our hands on that is, reliable. And we can actually put in like an activity into a community and say, what is that impact? And what is this geographical footprint? Now, one thing what we've developed is more or less evidence-based information for good policy and strategies for development. It is a piece of the puzzle. It's not the end, it's a means to an end. So it's one part of the puzzle. So then you got policy, then you got qualitative assessment, and then you got other things that come into play. And so we are hoping to make a big splash. Is that right, Kim? In the next year or so, where we'll have things coming online. We've been developing some tools for visualization and so on. Right now, I can tell you what commodities go into a community, what income is generated by what industries, and who's connected to whom, and what money leaves New West Valley and goes to Gander. But you can't buy that data and you can't find it because we generate it from all the data that we collect and other information. So this is where RANLab is going. And by the way, we provide opportunities for undergraduates and graduates. I've hired over the last 10 years probably 50 undergraduates to work with us.
So that's a resource
sort of
that fits under goal 4, along with vital signs. And so thanks, Alvin.
Sort of thing. And the other thing we've been doing is integrating all the new 2016 data just released last week into our big data model. And so right now we can data mine to occupations, age, skills, and then we identify what occupation skills are under stress. So if you want to know what you should be in 5 years' time as a skill set or an occupation, we'll hopefully be able to identify that and post that in the next coming months.
Right on. Stay tuned. Thanks. We've got about 16 minutes. You've got your templates we want you to fill in if you're so inclined, or you can do it after and send it back to us. But any further topics, suggestions, questions? Yep, Lee.
Audister. I'm the director of the Gardner Center, which is part of the Faculty of Business for those who've not heard of it before. I've heard a number of comments here about how Harris Center can help try and connect the university with the community on things other than research. our center does that specifically in the area of helping people develop skills and helping organizations and businesses improve their organizations and businesses. We connect the expertise primarily in the Faculty of Business, but also beyond, to help individuals and organizations deal with that. So we're not at all research oriented. We take skills like conflict management, understanding finance and marketing and HR, and we help those organizations transfer that knowledge from the university to those organizations and individuals. We struggle a little bit because we are resident here in the city and we are a for-profit center. We tend to be primarily focused or tend to primarily attract those in this area because of the financial constraints that they often face. However, we would very much like to expand our ability to reach farther across the province. And so I was particularly happy to see goal 3 and objective 3.3 about engaging with other centers. As we look forward to working with the Harris Center to help us figure out how we can get out to some of these other areas. We already have plans to see if we can go provide some training to some of the entrepreneurs on the Bonavista Peninsula right now, for example, who are gathered in one place, may have limitations that stop them from coming in to do training at the Harris Center. We'd very much like to see if we can go out there. But I'm sure there are other areas and other groups that we may not be engaged with, but that the Harris Center is on a regular basis. So we are going to be roomies with the Harris Center and the new battery facility. So this is exactly the type of collaboration that we're looking forward to.
Thank you, Lee. And while Kathy gets the mic to Boyan, who wants to respond to that or add in, I think moving to the battery will be partly because we'll be cheek by jowl, but also the battery is going to be wired to the hilt. So the challenge is always with this province, the geography and the dispersed population. So I think we can utilize distance technology, and of course, Mun is a pro at that, but also the College of North Atlantic, where there's a new president, there's a new associate vice president, applied research, and they've been talking, and they are a partner in YAFL. And they also want to collaborate with us because they have 17 campuses, feet on the ground, and we could be doing way more with them also. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there. Point?
Can I take like 3 minutes to talk about SNCC?
If it's good, it has to be
It's good. It's good. Okay. So, many of you know that in the past we organized regional workshops. So we would go 4 times a year to 4 different regions in the province, 1 in Labrador, 3 on the island. That worked great when we had partners in regional economic development boards. Once those boards were dissolved, we lost those regional partners. And for a while, we kind of pretended they're still there, and we would organize these ad hoc planning committees in the regions. But then what happened, we would come to a region that hasn't talked to itself for 3 years. And it became really a pointless exercise to bring researchers into a region and expect projects to come out of a one-day conversation. So Amy Jones, I'm sorry, I will never get used to it. Amy Jones put together the original kind of idea of what we could do to make those workshops better. So now we are rolling out through the Sustainable Northern Coastal Communities Initiative, the first round of these new workshops. So instead of doing 4 workshops in 4 different regions, we are going to do 2 regions a year with repeated visits. We did a first set on the tip of Northern Peninsula. So there was a region where we didn't bring anybody from MUN. It was just an opportunity for a community to spend a day, for a region to spend a day together. They determined some priorities. And then we got some researchers to submit letters of interest to do research in those particular areas. And then we brought them to the region, and we actually funded 3 projects that they finalized working with the region. There's going to be a 3rd session in that plan, and that 3rd session is meant to be capacity building based on the needs that the region identifies. So I already have the Gardner Center very much in my sights. It may not be, I know that because of the way you're structured, revenue generation is important to you. This may not be a revenue generating opportunity, but it might be a quick half-a-day workshop that can get you people to, do it online
Marketing.
or whatever. It's a great marketing tool, but it will also help regions to kind of get a little bit of a capacity to do a few things better than they're doing it in the past. So yes, I'm looking forward to being in the battery with you guys and kind of figuring out how this works. Yeah.
Great. Other thoughts, suggestions for the next fiscal year, and or comments on the 5-year plan framework or any other topic? Short snappers. Well, we've covered pretty much. Is there any topic, Harris Center people, that we should have covered that we didn't touch on? Alvin? Oh, hang on now.
Oh, sorry.
Say that
Myself
again?
and Amy are meeting tomorrow with the Homeless Network, and we're looking at a project where we look at the impact of homelessness on local economies and stuff like that, and the net negative effect of actually having people being displaced and spending a lot of time and energy looking for places to live, and so on. And actually, the other thing as well is looking at underutilized labor market, parts of the labor market, like myself and David Frischwell looked at that problem before, and we found there, that is a big cost socially and economically to an economy and to development. So in actuality, what he was actually saying there is actually not only the fact that they could be a part of the future labor market and demands, but also things that are, sort of thing in the whole network of the economy and what it costs, sort of thing for that to be there, and not only just in economic sense, but also in the social and well-being of places as well.
Super. Thanks,
sort of
Alvin.
thing. Okay.
Any other gaps? Oh, why don't you speak to, sorry, Gather, keep you running. If you haven't heard about Rural Roots, you need to.
So I'll tell you about it. It started as a little experiment that we just cooked up. It was meant to be a weekly column for community newspapers, only to realize that community newspapers are disappearing. There aren't any in the north of Canada. And when we did a bit of research, it turned out that community and campus radio stations across the country are booming. So we decided to create, in partnership with the Canadian Rural Revitalization Foundation, a podcast that deals with rural issues. The first season was 15 episodes, was literally done on the side of my desk with a mic on the side of my desk. And I thought, we'll get 200 people, we'll write something. If you want to do a podcast, this is how you do it. We got thousands of people listening, radio stations carrying the podcast across the country. So we decided to make it sound good. We now partnered with CHMR. There's half of the second season is up. We publish a new episode every 2 weeks. But it's an opportunity to engage with many of the issues that you guys brought up that we maybe are not able to do research in, but we can do a double, 2 episodes on opioid crisis in rural Canada. We can do an episode on 3 young women who decide to go back to the farm and run family farms. We can do episodes on things like food waste and food security in rural areas. Because we have national partners, the a little bit broader. It's not limited to Memorial University, but because we work at Memorial University, we made sure that the rest of the country hears about good stuff happening here. So you'll hear a lot of Newfoundland voices on that podcast. And if you're interested in listening to any of it, you can go to ruralrootspodcasts.com. That's all one word, rural, R-O-U-T-E-S, not roots, but routes, podcasts.com. So you can subscribe through iTunes or however you want to do it.
Thank you, Boyan.
New episodes are also included in the regional newsletter. So
right on. And if
you
you
get that through Already Have Access.
Yep. Final thoughts, suggestions for the next fiscal year. We'll have a plan together by April 1st, and lots more communications to come. And you know where to get us. So we used to have a great Christmas reception, but budget cuts killed that about 4 years ago. We didn't provide booze, but we had bacon wrapped scallops. We don't do that anymore. Some miserable days we're living in. But when the battery opens, partner with Gardner, Genesis, and maybe have a shared one or something. we can hide in each other's. But we'll also have a location there that can take a lot of people. Hope you all have a great holiday. I can't wait because MUN actually shuts down for a few days. But we're really, really honored that you took the time to come and talk to us about our plan. Very committed folks in the Harris Center. And we're lots of issues in this province, but we're also very optimistic. There's no better place in the world to live. And we ain't going anywhere. So help us make it even better. Thanks a lot, and all the best.